In today's video script, there are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any words. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, like sitting by the ocean or lying under the stars, but the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and suffocating. A silence that reminds you just how alone you really are. And that silence? It came to me not in an argument, not in a fight, but in a phone call that ended far too quickly. A call I thought would comfort me, but instead left me colder than ever before. I had just lost my job. Not because of something I did. Not because I messed up. But because the cafe where I had poured coffee, wiped tables, and smiled through tired mornings for nearly 3 long years, closed down overnight. No warnings. No farewell shifts. No chance to prepare myself. One day I was in my apron, refilling sugar jars and listening to the soft hum of jazz music we always played in the background. The next, I was standing in my kitchen, no uniform, no income, staring at bills stacked on my table like silent enemies waiting to crush me. Rent was due at the end of the week. Groceries were running low. My savings? A joke. Enough for maybe gas, maybe a week's worth of bread and milk. Nothing more. And in that moment, as panic sat like a weight on my chest, I did what anyone might do when the ground beneath them begins to crack. I reached for the person I thought would hold me steady. He wasn't my husband. We didn't even live together. That was his choice, not mine. From the very beginning, he had drawn boundaries. Space is healthy, he always said. Boundaries keep things balanced. And for a while, I believed him. But after years of hearing those words, those boundaries felt less like safety and more like walls. Walls that kept me on the outside of a life I thought we were supposed to be building together. Still, despite the distance, despite the nagging doubts that whispered in the back of my mind, I called him first. My voice trembled as I explained what had happened. I didn't even get 2 sentences in before he cut me off. "Well, you'll figure it out," he said. As if I was telling him about the weather. As if losing my job and not being able to pay rent was a passing inconvenience. "You always do." The words stung more than I expected. Because they weren't wrong. I did always figure things out. But this time felt different. This time, I wasn't sure if I could. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to say the words I had been avoiding. I just thought, maybe you could help me this month. I wouldn't. He sighed. Loudly. And then I heard it, his fingers tapping against something, distracted. Like he was already somewhere else. "It's not really my responsibility, is it?" he said finally. "You're independent. You always say so." I wanted to scream. Not because he was wrong, but because he was using my own words against me. Yes, I was independent. I had always taken pride in that. But there's a difference between independence and drowning alone while someone watches from the shore. The conversation ended in one of those awkward pauses where neither of us knew what to say. He muttered a half-hearted "take care" before hanging up. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear even though the line was dead, my reflection staring back at me from the dark window. And for the first time in a long time, I realized. The person I loved wasn't some. The apartment felt colder that night. Not because of the temperature, but because of the emptiness. I sat by the window, knees pulled to my chest, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one outside. The city didn't stop moving just because my world had crumbled. Cars still passed. People still laughed on sidewalks. Somewhere, music still played. But inside my small apartment, silence wrapped itself around me like a heavy blanket. Hours passed. I don't remember crying, but my sweater sleeves were damp, my face raw. And then, just when I thought the night couldn't get heavier, a knock at the door. Not frantic. Not impatient. Just steady. I wiped my face with my sleeve and forced myself off the floor. When I opened the door, it was him, my landlord. He was a man who carried presence without trying. Tall, broad shoulders, dark skin that seemed to catch the hallway light. His voice was always calm, steady, measured, never raised, never sharp. "Sorry to bother you this late," he said with a small nod. "Just following up on the rent situation." My stomach dropped. Of course. Rent. I must have looked terrible, red eyes, messy hair, still wearing the oversized sweater I'd thrown on that morning because I couldn't bring myself to care. "I know the deadline's coming," I whispered, throat tight. I lost my job. He paused. Not the awkward kind of pause people fill with fake sympathy, but the kind where someone is actually listening. That's rough, he said quietly. I'm sorry to hear it. Heat rose in my neck, humiliation burning through me. I hated how small I felt, how exposed my struggle must have been. I'll figure it out, I blurted. I need a little time. But his expression didn't shift. He didn't lean against the doorframe. He didn't cross his arms. He just stood there, steady, grounded. I'm not here to pressure you, he said softly. But if you'd like to talk about options, my office is open. Come by tomorrow. Options. The word echoed in my head long after he left. I didn't know what he meant. I wasn't even sure I wanted to find out. But as the door closed behind him and I slid back down to the floor, burying my face in my hands, one thought refused to leave me. The night after that knock, sleep never really came. I tossed, I turned, I stared at the ceiling until the patterns in the plaster started looking like maps I couldn't read. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there. The landlord. His face calm. His voice steady. Not a trace of judgment, not even pity. Just presence. It was strange, because in that 2-minute conversation, I had felt more acknowledged than in the last 3 years of my relationship. And that thought scared me. By the time the first pale light of morning crept into my window, the bills were still on the table, the silence was still pressing, and the words he had left me with still echoed in my mind. Options. My office is open. Come by tomorrow. What did he mean? Payment plans? Extensions? Or something else entirely? I didn't know. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't avoid him forever. The next day, I found myself standing outside the small office tucked away on the first floor of the building. It was nothing fancy, frosted glass door, brass handle that had seen better days, a nameplate that simply read, Building Manager. I almost turned around. My hand hovered near the handle, shaking slightly. My pride screamed at me to leave, to figure things out on my own. But the truth was heavier than pride. I needed help. So I pushed the door open. He was behind the desk, reading through a file. When he looked up, his expression didn't shift into surprise or annoyance. Instead, he gave that same steady nod. You came, he said. Not as a question, but as if he already knew I would. I swallowed, closing the door behind me. Yeah, I whispered. I wasn't sure if I should. There's no harm in talking, he replied calmly, gesturing to the chair across from him. Have a seat. I sat down, hands twisted in my lap. The silence stretched, but it wasn't suffocating like before. It was patient. It gave me space to speak, and eventually, I did. I lost my job, I admitted, my voice cracking on the last word. The cafe shut down. No notice, nothing. Rent's due in 3 days and I stopped, fighting the lump rising in my throat. He didn't interrupt. Didn't shift impatiently. Just waited. Finally, I exhaled, the words tumbling out. I can't pay it. Not this month. For a moment, he simply leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Not cold, not detached, just thinking. All right, he said after a pause. We'll work something out. I blinked. What? You need time. I can give you that. Rent doesn't have to be a sword hanging over your head right now. The relief hit me like a wave, but it was tangled with suspicion. People didn't just offer kindness. Not without a catch. Why? I asked softly. The question slipped out before I could stop it. His eyes met mine, calm and unwavering. Because sometimes people need help. That's all. I stared at him, searching his face for some sign of insincerity. But there was nothing, no smirk, no hidden agenda. Just quiet steadiness. Still, the words sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't used to this. To someone stepping in without reminding me how much I owed them later. That night, as I sat in my apartment with the city humming outside my window, I thought about the 2 men in my life. One, someone I had loved for years. Someone who claimed to care, but when I needed him most, he turned away. The other, a man who barely knew me, whose role in my life was supposed to be limited to collecting rent and fixing leaky faucets. Yet somehow, he had shown me more understanding in one conversation than my boyfriend had in all the years we'd been together. The comparison burned. It forced me to face a truth I had been avoiding. Love isn't about words whispered in the dark or promises made over dinner. Love is about presence. About being there when it matters. And the person I loved most wasn't there.